Okay, good morning, everybody. Wasn't it great to see what Carl was doing, what they were doing in Wales? One thing that also happens from Wales, another expert from Wales, in the Republic of Ireland, there's a programme that's introduced to all of the primary schools called Food Dudes. It's a programme devised by behaviour analysts, and it's in every primary school in the Republic. So its ABA is being used in the Republic. But Northern Ireland being the country that it is, we are still battling after 15 years to bring this science to the community. Whenever I first taught applied behaviour analysis to parents, way back 15 years ago now, 15, 17 years, I still have this distinct memory of the time whenever, something that all teachers enjoy, the moment when you see your students getting it. I remember the mood of the class when it dawned on these parents that suddenly they understood there was one thing that could address each of their individual needs. Despite all the differences with all the kids and all the problems that were thrown up, there was one thing that could be used for all of them. And that was the scientific method. Now, what we hear in Northern Ireland is that we can't have one thing for everybody because every child's different. And that's the problem that we're having getting the science rolled out into the community. The one thing that is effective is the scientific method. And in my presentation today, I'll be doing a simple practical exercise where you have a chance to see the scientific method in action. You will be doing an experiment, so to speak. And you'll be seeing some of the stuff that Carl talked about, practice-based evidence. Whenever I was teaching those classes, we had those classes, they turned up, I didn't know who was going to turn up to the class, some about 30 to 40 parents in front of me, each with different problems, and how the hell am I going to deal with all of this? They were desperate for help. But what I wanted to make sure was that I don't leave those parents with quick fixes. One of the most damaging problems, or the damaging effects that can happen, is that people run away with the idea that applied behaviour analysis is about techniques, and that's all it's about. A technique for this, a technique for that, and so on. Now, while that may help in the short term, it doesn't help whenever you run up against a new problem. How on earth do I deal with this new need that my child throws up? So my goal in teaching those parents was not just to teach them techniques, but to teach them about the nature of science, the scientific method. So my presentation today is organized around that. And to help me, I'm going to read quite a bit of it this time that I don't normally do. Well, maybe not too much of it. I'm going to take some quotations from Skinner. His book, Science and Human Behaviour, published in 1953, which is currently available online, free, from the B.F. Skinner Foundation. So you go to the B.F. Skinner Foundation, you'll find his book, Science and Human Behaviour. In 1953, and you'll hear some of the quotations that are particularly relevant today and which contrast with the current understanding of applied behaviour analysis in Northern Ireland. So Crowley gave me that title. So what does it mean? Building adaptive skills. Okay, adaptive behaviour is often characterised by a kind of behaviour that allows an individual. So we're dealing with individuals. So how can one thing help all the different individuals? We're back to that question. And what's particularly pertinent here is that whenever you look at the syllabus, I have to change this magnification. Whenever you look at the syllabus in every psychology department in Ireland and the UK, you'll find a predilection for focusing on group statistics. Every student has to do their stats. Here's what Skinner said about stats in 1953. A prediction of what the average individual will do is often of little or no value in dealing with a particular individual. A science of behaviour which concerns only the behaviour of groups is not likely to be of help in understanding of the particular case. So Skinner's making the case for dealing with individuals. But psychologists who are trained within psychology departments are not trained in what's called single case research design. So perhaps it's understandable why they can't get their head around the fact that, yeah, we have a technology, as Carl's talked about, for helping the individual. Now, when it comes to education generally, this is the type of quotation that many people might like as a nice, fluffy, warm way to talk about education. Sounds nice, but it's not much good when it comes to developing practical skills. So imagine for a moment your driving instructor teaching you with this attitude, or a surgeon teaching medical students with this attitude. Surely the practical steps are what is important, for without them, the student would not be guided in the acquisition of a concrete skill, whether that be an academic skill, a life skill, or a social skill. So we're talking about developing practical skills in a focused way that goes beyond what sounds nice. And this is part of the problem. It sounds nice when we do it that way, and the sciencey stuff doesn't sound that good. And I want to address that in some of my presentation or some of my slides. So whenever I'm teaching my students or teaching the parents, I find this particular slide very important, very useful. It's a 15th century wood carving. And what it shows, I've just adapted this slightly. Okay, I have to go backwards and forwards. See that area there that's coloured? Does that show up? Okay, that's coloured green. This is to represent the world as we know it. The ordinary, everyday world, the understanding we have of the world. But there's a person, because there's the old worldview. Let's call it the old worldview. There's a guy down there poking his head out through that ordinary, everyday understanding. And that person is the scientist. And that person is trying to find new ways to look at the world around them, trying to figure out, how can I develop a new perspective on what's around me? And from that new perspective, there will be the new worldview. This is where the science kicks in. Quotation from Skinner again. Science is not concerned with just getting the facts. Science supplies its own wisdom. It leads to a new conception of a subject matter, a new way of thinking about that part of the world to which it has addressed itself. Science is more than the mere description of events as they occur. It is an attempt to discover order, to show that certain events stand in lawful relation to other events. No practical technology can be based upon science until such relations have been discovered. Now, Carl talked on technology. I'm going to pick up on this word because it causes problems, I think. So what Carl was showing you there then, if we follow this blue arrow, was how we take the findings from science and bring it back into the community. But if all you ever remember are the basic techniques, then you haven't understood what it is about the heart of the science. What is it about the way in which we can look at the world differently, which guides these scientists? And can parents, can teachers learn this view of the world? Now, when we think of scientists, this is like an iconic instrument in the history of science. Again, another quotation from Skinner. We tend to think of the scientist in his observatory or laboratory with his telescope, microscope, and cyclotrons. Instruments give us a dramatic picture of science in action. But although science could not have gone very far without the devices which improve our contact with the surrounding world, and although any advanced science would be helpless without them, they are not science itself. If we are to use the methods of science, again, this is Skinner, if we are to use the methods of science in the field of human affairs, we must assume that behavior is lawful. This is something that all psychology students are taught, that behavior is lawful. We must expect to discover what a person does is the result of specifiable conditions, and that once these conditions have been discovered, we can anticipate and to some extent influence his actions. So science and behavior analysis is regarded as a natural science, gives us a way of looking at things. And here's my attempt to try to explain that kind of differently. Imagine you could see everything you ever wanted to see inside a person. Everything, okay? What you see from a behavior perspective is not an explanation for any behavior, because what you're seeing is the thing you're trying to explain. So everything that's happening inside a person is regarded as data. That's the difference. That's the different perspective that the behavior analysis takes. Everything that's happening inside a person is data. Data explained by looking at the current circumstances. And when you take that perspective, you develop explanations like this. An explanation is now regarded as a statement about the kinds of changes one is likely to see under specific circumstances. And with that perspective, you can now answer questions like this. What kinds of changes are likely to be observed under specific circumstances? And out of that pops the word technology. In other words, if I wanted to produce particular kinds of changes, what sorts of circumstances should I arrange? This is how behavioral analysts approach their subject matter. But it's this word technology that I want to pick up on. Now, it's a kind of a cold word, if you're not familiar with it. And in these next few images, I want to explain some of the difficulties with bringing technical language into a community who's not familiar with it, or who've not done the courses, as Carl suggested. Maybe gone 1 or 2 days and picked up a technique. But the understanding of technology comes with the understanding of the science. So in this image here, imagine this guy, he's a surgeon, he's got an emergency operation on a kid, and he's giving a running commentary. And these are his medical students. Now, the running commentary is precise. It guides the students in terms of exactly what he's doing. And he's hoping that he does a good running comedy so the students will learn from him and what he's doing. Now, imagine that comedy is still running. Very precise, accurate information being relayed. That comedy is running, we now change the audience and put in place the parents. Now, if he's talking the way he would be talking to his medical students, those parents are going to think he's a cold man dealing with my kid like a lump of meat. This is the problem with bringing technical language or scientific language into a community. It can be misunderstood. And the whole science can be thrown out because it's seen as cold and insensitive and not person-centered is one big one that happens in Northern Ireland. Behaviour analysis is not child-centered, it's method-driven, as if there's something wrong with using the scientific method. So let's look at skill development conceptually. We're basically talking about nurturing, but nurturing needs an understanding of the process of change. I'll explain that in a moment. So when we develop our technology, we're developing it from a natural science perspective. This is how life works. And once you understand how life works, you can adapt your procedures to facilitate and bring out changes that are relevant to the particular problem you're addressing. But there's another issue. If you just follow techniques, it's like giving somebody a fish to solve a quick problem. Okay, you can feed them for a day. That's an old cliche. But teach a man to fish, and you can feed him for a lifetime. So learning to develop learning a scientific perspective is one way to give parents, or to empower parents with skill development. It may seem strange, but parents want concrete things to do, and I'm saying, but you must learn a scientific perspective. But nurturing and technology, to a scientist, are interchangeable. The technology of skill development needs an understanding of how to nurture. So when we look at the different types of skills that a parent may be faced with teaching, any parent, not just a parent of a child with autism, we're talking about where is the child at the moment and how far can I take him along the way. So irrespective of what the skill is, at the level that the kid is at, we're faced with the problem of getting from point A to point B. Yeah, point A to point B. Now, to show you this in action, this kind of thinking, we're dealing with behaviour in time, and I'm going to have some images to reinforce this idea of we're looking at behaviour changing in time. The graphs that Carl put up are behaviours changing in time for the individuals. Okay? We'll do a little practical exercise for you. Could you each get out a pen and hold the pen, shown in the left picture. Okay? Now, so this is where you are currently. And my goal as a teacher is to bring you from here to here. You have to end up with a pen start here, and you're going to end up with a pen here. Just a simple exercise, right? Here's how you do it. So I'm not going to teach you. Can we get this to work? Very simple movement. Okay, do that. Hands up, how many people have done it? Okay, you guys are in my class. Okay, try it again. You ready? There's your starting position. Leaving my class aside, how many have you actually done it? One person? That's not very good, so... Hang on, I must be a really bad teacher, or else you guys are very thick. This is a very simple piece of behaviour. So how do we approach this? Give you one more go at it. There's your starting position. Brain freeze, okay? That's what it feels like to have difficulties learning. Okay? You see what it feels like to have difficulties learning? If I'm a good teacher, I'm going to have to find ways to help you through that. But we're talking about teaching difficulties, and Carl's presentation was finding ways to address teaching difficulties, not learning difficulties, teaching difficulties, way in which the science has developed procedures that teach effectively. So I want to then concentrate in looking at this new worldview in behaviour analysis. So here's a simple arbitrary piece of behaviour. Nice sexy corridor. Just a simple piece of behaviour. Now, we bring in our scientific perspective. And this is just to represent that scientific perspective, okay? So, nothing particularly new until you learn to observe as a scientist. And one of the things that you will learn when you study behaviour analysis is that when you observe human behaviour, you're looking at a stream of changes. Behaviour happens in time. And we change constantly. From the moment we're born to the moment we die, there's a continuous process of change. We must accept that fact and take that on board whenever we're teaching. And that's one of the reasons why we should learn to develop technology to meet the needs of the individual. We shouldn't impose our technology on our preconceived ideas of how we are. We look at how we are, we change across time. Now, Skinner said about behaviour, behaviour is a difficult subject matter, not because it is inaccessible, but because it is extremely complex. Since it is a process rather than a thing, it cannot be held still for observation. It is changing, fluid, evanescent, and for this reason it makes great technical demands upon the ingenuity and energy of the scientist. But there's nothing essentially insoluble about the problems which arise from this fact. Now, that's one way that one could represent this whole idea of a process of change. Another way that I tried was this. And what's interesting about this graphic is that it actually represents the whole idea of measurement. We can now look at what are called the dimensions of behaviour. We can count frequencies, we can count durations, we can count what are called latencies, time for something to happen. And we also see that any observation at one particular point in time is related to events that happened previously. We now have a different perspective on a human being. We're accepting this is how we are, and perhaps this way of looking at things feeds into the way in which we can design technology to facilitate change, because change is happening anyway. Now, if we're going to facilitate change, how might that look? Okay, so we take our perspective again. We're looking at an individual. We have our individual changing across time. So time, in this instance, this image is going from right to left. Change is moving in that direction. And when it comes to any applied work, unlike that nice, soft image of what teaching is about, we will specify outcomes. And these are called, in my technical language, target behaviours. I will specify what the goal is. And along the way, I will use something called reinforcement, which isn't a theory, but a discovery about how behaviour is best influenced. When we use positive reinforcement, when we use reinforcement to bring the behaviour in a particular direction, we can do that. That technology exists. Technology, if you remember, was a way, an art of doing something, bringing out the best in people. And one technique within all of that there is called differential reinforcement of successive approximations. Again, that's our technical language, which I will explain. Differential reinforcement. So now I'll bring in a nice, soft, fluffy image to try to undo the damaging effects of those people who have reactions to the technical language. So let's imagine we have a mother and child interacting. When I look at that interaction, I will automatically, as a scientist, see that interaction as something happening across time. And if the mother is teaching the kid language, we have our behavioural stream and the child making a few sounds. What happens spontaneously in that mother-child interaction is that the mother will give attention to some sounds more than others as the child is learning the language through that interaction. So the parent doesn't need to know that she's doing that for it to happen. The science has formalized the interaction. The science can now talk about what's going on, and if there are problems with that interaction, perhaps the way in which we formalize the nature of the interaction will give us some guidelines to how we can intervene if there's a problem. Now, I can use a different graphic to represent that. In the presence of a parent, a number of behaviours occur. In this instance, a variety of sounds. And the parent may give attention only to recognizable sounds. This often happens quite spontaneously. The consequence of that is that these sounds happen more often while others decrease, although there will still be some variability. That's, in essence, the ABCs of behaviour analysis: antecedent, behaviour, consequence. And what we see there is that a behaviour has been selected by consequences. A different example might be, for example, in the presence of peers, a variety of behaviours occur, and attention given to social behaviour. And I'm actually quite fortunate that Carl gave an example of that. But technically, what we were doing, or in that experiment, whenever you arrange consequences for certain behaviours, you're doing the same thing. You're selecting behaviour, trying to make it happen more frequently, because it's important to the individual that it happens. Okay, so that's the theory side of things, introducing you to the science. But what does it look like in real life, in a real application? I was hunting through the web to see if I could find some useful video clips for you, and I got this lovely one in a website called Tag Teach. The web address will be on this next slide. Tag Teaching uses the principles you're about to see, or the principles we've talked about, you're about to see them in the video clip, of a mother trying to teach her kid to accept a nose spray. So the child is in the mother's arms and she's putting the nose spray up to his face, and he's doing all this. So there's your problem behaviour. So at one point he's doing this, doesn't want it. The goal is to get him to here where he accepts it. So we're moving behaviour in time. She knows about reinforcement. She knows about differential reinforcement, taking small steps along the way. So let's see it in action. That was behaviour analysis in action. And what we saw there was the parent making decisions on the fly. Depending on how far she could bring that kid along, she decided to go on, maybe a bit further, and she maybe backed off if she was going too far. She was making decisions, and she was using a little clicker. I have one here. Using a little clicker to mark the behaviour that she found acceptable. This was already trained as the reinforcer for the child. So this was well done. Okay. Now, if you go into the Tag Teach website, you'll find all sorts of examples of shaping, which is the technical name for it, used for teaching dance, for teaching sports, for teaching a range of things that aren't rocket science, but there's a craft to it. There is a way of doing this. And we're going to get you a chance to practice it. To set the scene for it, I'm going to show you what it looks like with an arbitrary behaviour. Because we don't have any problem behaviours with us at the minute that we're going to work on, but we're going to try it with an arbitrary piece of behaviour. Now, this is taken from a tutorial that Carola and I created some years ago, looking at contingencies. That mother was using reinforcement contingencies. If this behaviour, then this consequence. This is how you set it up. So looking at behaviour changing from here, this is our starting point now, we're changing the direction. Behaviour going from here to here across time. These are the instructions that this subject will be getting. The subject happens to be sitting in front of me, Stephen. So I want you to watch this because you're going to be doing this.
Okay, instructions are very simple. You have to make that light come on by behaviour. Okay, and I tap the table on the back. Okay, again.
My goal was to get him to walk in a circle around the chair. penny dropped. You see it? You can see it. Okay, so we're not going to do this. But to do this, I need a volunteer who will be the learner. Okay, can you come up? Is going to, instead of using a clicker, I want you to clap your hands. I want you to clap your hands. Okay, can we practice that to start with? It's important to do a clap at the same time. The behaviour that I want you to train off you to do. Now again, we start here. Okay? The goal is to pick the behaviour, but I want you to see something to do. I want you to get over here, pick up this pen, and place it on top of this case. Right? Okay, there's many more variations than that we can do, but let me just round up now by showing you how behaviour analysis deals with those kinds of observations. If we take the behaviour, going back to the graphic initially, of the student walking across or walking around the room, when we stretch that behaviour across time, we're looking at the behavioural stream again. And we identify within that sequence of interactions the key events, those particular key reinforcers. We're looking at behaviour consequence relations. And those behaviour consequence relations, once you've understood the principles of behaviour analysis and how reinforcement operates, only when those consequences were arranged across time in the way that they were, did that student walk in a circle. Only when certain consequences were arranged across time in the way that they were, did Matthew engage certain behaviours. So the explanation for the behaviour is found in the environment, the way in which the environment is organised. That's a huge difference from traditional psychological perspectives. But it's important from the point of view of developing practical skills, because you're now in a position to approach the issue differently. You saw that you can't get there immediately. You take small steps at a time, you build the repertoire up, you make sure certain behaviours are in place before you go on to the next stage. Stuff that Carl talked about in terms of fluency. But in this role play, we can see it happening. We see database decision making happening right in front of you. Now, if I go to the formal description of what you're doing, it looks like this. So we have our behaviour, we selected from that behaviour. Then you change the criterion for reinforcement. What that does, that creates variability. Out of that variability, you select again. You then change the criterion for reinforcement. It creates more variability. This is the process that you guys were involved with. And bit by bit, you start from here. You move towards your goal. You were using differential reinforcement of successive approximations. That's called shaping. Okay? That's me finished. Thanks.